Do you do problems?
No.
Never.
I always found them irrelevant. Positions that never come up in actual games.
Let me show you one I think you might like.
That's a clip from a Netflix show called The Queen's Gambit about a woman chess player. And I have an interview coming up in a minute with Terje Simonsen, who has written an excellent book about parapsychology. But as you'll hear, we wound up talking about a lot of other things, including chess.
Make a connection. I used to play chess with the grandmaster of the Ordo Templar Orientis here in Norway. And he is quite famous because, you know, the Norwegian black metal milieu in the music, they were famous for burning churches. And he was some kind of ideological lodestaff for them, you know, Simon Mitka. And he did not respect me because, you know, I tried to be a good guy. And somehow I felt he was despising that because I was not out for power and conjuring spirits and so. But after I beat him 7 times in a row in chess, he started respecting me.
But we did talk about parapsychology too. And I think there is a strangeness to where parapsychology has gone. It's just made itself irrelevant. And I think part of the reason it's made itself irrelevant is because it's tried to thread that needle in a way that divorces itself from spirituality.
Very interesting. Yeah, I share lots of your general considerations about this. What I miss in parapsychology is the existential aspect of it.
Welcome to Skeptiko, where we explore controversial science and spirituality with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Sakaris, and today we welcome Terje Simonsen to Skeptiko. Terje has a new book. Actually, it's a republication of a book, but he's added some stuff. It's a great book, A Short History of Nearly Everything Paranormal, Our Secret Powers, Telepathy, Clairvoyance, and Precognition. This is a book that is getting a lot of attention. It won the 2019 Book Award from the Parapsychology Association. It's gotten very nice reviews and accolades from no less than Dean Radin and other folks in the parapsychology community. So it's really quite an accomplishment. And Terje, it's great to have you on Skeptiko. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad. I have always admired the interviews you have done. So, yeah.
We'll see what you think at the end. We are going to have a good time. You know the Skeptiko drill. There's so much to cover. I want to say that this book is great. Anyone who's interested in parapsychology will enjoy this book, and I think we'll find it important. It fills in a lot of gaps. I mean, I feel like I know this field pretty well, and there was a bunch of stuff I ran across. I didn't know that, or it filled in a little piece of this or that. So there's a lot to be gained from this book, and it is quite extensive. So I'm really, really excited that you've put it out, and I think a lot of people will want to have it as part of their collection and as a way. I say this sometimes, but you know, this is a great way to introduce other people to some of the stuff you're always nagging them about. If you're into parapsychology and you're saying Rupert Sheldrake and you're saying Dean Radin and you're saying these other people, to put all that stuff into a context, very, very well done. So congrats on that.
Thanks a lot.
So that out of the way, I want to jump right into kind of the deep end of the pool. I know that you've studied this field a lot. Tell people more about your background. You know, I pulled up your Wikipedia page, and very interesting. I mean, Norwegian historian. I'm not even sure how that fits into all this, but I don't know what that means. It sounds interesting. And then, as I was just kidding you around here, I was kidding you around about playing chess on the weekends with Magnus. And then you said, you have played with his trainer. So you must be quite an accomplished chess player as well, which is kind of a little aside. But tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to do this. You're also interested in the esoteric stuff in general and Book of Enoch. There's a lot of interesting stuff in your background. Tell us more about it.
Well, yeah, my personal interest is, I think every kid is interested in fairy tales. So I read quite a lot, say Norwegian folk tales, and also this Arabian stuff, 1001 Nights, and also Greek myths and Norse mythology and all that. And what you find is part of these traditions, which is of course fantasy, is the lots of magical stuff of different kinds. So I became interested in that, and also. But of course, at that time it was just, as I say, fairy tales and fantasy. But I later became part of Christian Youth Club, and I witnessed some strange phenomena, and also people who I trusted told me about strange experiences, and I had no reason to say disbelieve what they told me. And later also I discussed with my family. For instance, my grandfather, he was an engineer, and he also told me about having experienced kind of paranormal stuff. So then it somehow went from being just fantasy and fairy tales more to get into the real life. And I also met some people later that gave me quite good demonstrations of clairvoyance and telepathy. So at a point in time, I find that I had to study this, and I started because what if you go say in a Christian connection, they will often say. If such things happen, for instance, a healing, they will say this healing is from God or it's from Satan. You know, there's no neutral ground there. And I felt that could be a bit strange, because if you really help some people getting better, how could that be from Satan, you know? So it didn't quite fit my say view of a good explanatory model list. And also I found that many of these say phenomena were reported from different traditions all over the world. You could go to shamanic traditions, for instance, and European esoteric tradition, Sufi, mysticism, and so, and you would find these phenomena. So this black and white God-Satan explanatory model did not fit my need here. So I study parapsychology and also occultism and magic and all these esoteric traditions. And then I somehow felt I get closer to this. And I also started to study at the Norwegian University of Oslo, and I got as a mentor Professor Jan Erik Ebbestad Hansen. I think he is the greatest Norwegian expert in occultism, and you will find his publication list. It's more than 100 publications, articles, books, and different kinds. So I got he as a mentor, and he asked me to write about Norwegian very important cultural journal called Janus, which was made by the Anthroposophical Society, you know, with Rudolf Steiner, this Austrian spiritual teacher. And also Steiner was a doctor in philosophy. He was not just kind of clairvoyant and mystic. He was really a quite clever academic as well. So I somehow from a personal interest in fairy tales and just some say spread observation from different traditions, it became more say serious also in a scholarly way then. So he guided me into this with anthroposophy, and also somehow we ended up making a book about this in Norwegian connection, very important cultural journal. Very many great Norwegian writers have been say searching for a higher meaning. You know, there has been quite a lot of both atheism and also other reactions towards conservative Christianity, of course, mostly healthy reactions, but people still ask their questions about the meaning of life. And many Norwegian intellectuals that did not fit in either the Christian or the atheistic, they found their meaning in anthroposophy. So, and also in Norway, this Steiner school or Waldorf school, I think it's called internationally, is quite strong milieu. So very many, for instance, the former Prime prime minister in Norway, and he is now chief of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. He is gone to this Waldorf school. So it's quite a strong, say, intellectual, spiritual tradition in Norway based on anthroposophy. So that become, so I also dealt with quite a lot of people in that milieu, and they gave me support also. And so as I said, it's a long journey, starting out with Norwegian folk tales and strange stories in the Christian community to a full-blown, say, academic, I would not say career, but at least research and some publications. And as you said, I also published about the first book of Enoch, which is a very interesting esoteric text from antiquity that probably had quite a lot of influence on Christianity, but say the bishops did not take it into the canon, in the Western canon. It was part of the Ethiopian canon in the Coptic church. And also I wrote about Martin Buber, very important Jewish philosopher, and his as many probably know, he's a philosopher of dialogue, and he is from this Hasidic tradition, which is Eastern European Jewish mysticism, which say ultimately is based on an interpretation of the Kabbalah. So I have done different kind of say research forays into this esoteric tradition, and also published some writing. I also have been done a bit on this more classical Hermetic tradition, this Renaissance occultism, which was part of the very, say, flowering milieu in Italy in the Quattrocento, the 14th century. A very important part. This Platonic academy was started by a philosopher, Marsilio Ficino, under the, say, auspices of the great banker Cosimo de' Medici. So I have liked to see phenomena not just as, oh, that is strange, oh, that was curious, oh, so, but I like to see the long lines and the big pictures and all the connections, you know. So that is my, say, academic and scholarly approach. But personally, it has been a very interesting journey, you know, to get to. I have interviewed about, I think, close to 100 clairvoyant persons from different traditions, people from Jamaica, from say Canadian traditions, Norwegian Sami traditions, Native American traditions, Indian traditions, and so this also this anthropological approach to see both similarities and differences between different kind of spiritual traditions all over the world. So that is also part of I like to somehow go up to the top of the mountain and to see, get a broad view of see the spiritual landscape, both in the cultural, say, anthropological and also historical, you know. So the more overview I can get, the better it is.
I'm glad you went through all that. I wouldn't have necessarily pulled that from the book, which is going to be something interesting that we're going to want to talk about. I hope we can get back to this very interesting needle threading of the Norse traditions, the magical traditions, the shamanic traditions of the Scandinavian people, and then this polarization in your society, European society, Western society, of Christianity on one side and atheism on the other side. Because a lot of times the US, when we think of the Northern European countries, we think of them as being very atheistic. You know, that's how it comes through to us. And that is certainly very limiting when we want to talk about some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So maybe the first question I'd have as it relates to parapsychology and this book is, what do you think? I mean, this is kind of a limited view. I started at parapsychology too, because I felt like in a way it's kind of a safe, sciencey way to explore some of this stuff. But I also felt it was limiting, and I felt it was limiting pretty quickly. And I always remember a friend of mine, Steve Volk, who wrote a terrific book called Fringeology. And Steve is a investigative reporter, so he has the kind of sensibility for this. but he wrote a great chapter in that book about going to the Parapsychology Association conference, and they're all atheists. And it's like, it's like, what the fuck, guys? That's it. At the end of the day, that's what you came up with. And I think there is a strangeness to where parapsychology has gone and what its future is, which is, it's just irrelevant. It's just made itself irrelevant. And I think part of the reason it's made itself irrelevant is because it's tried to thread that needle in a way that divorces itself from spirituality. And I wonder, I know that's kind of jumping right into the deep end of the pool, but that's where I wanted to go. So that's kind of a big one. What do you think about where parapsychology is heading and the state of it right now today?
Very interesting. Yeah, I share lots of your general considerations about this. What I miss in parapsychology is the existential aspect of it. So I totally agree with you. But on the other hand, you have great guys as Dean Radin there, and he do in fact write good articles that are published in respectable journals and so. So with guys like him in the field, I think it will still be saved somehow. But as you said, it's a limiting approach, and that was also, if you go into the Jungian tradition, you ask for the depth of the soul, and the bigger picture, which is a personal engagement. That is much more fruitful approach as I see it, and also the strength of the phenomena that you will experience both in personal life and also if you do research is much stronger phenomena when you go deal with those things existentially than when you deal with it just kind of as a detached observer. Because really, I write about this in the book also. If I may, if I compare it to a sexologist, doing erection research on people being sink down in a pool in ice cold water, and as I said, the frame conditions effectively hinders the phenomena in question from arising, so to say. So I'm trying to be a bit funny there. But as I said,
I get it.
Yeah, I think
I get it. And I think I get also, Dean Radin, world class, top notch. And also there's a certain, baptism by fire that the parapsychologists have gone through that is to be admired. But a lot of those people have kind of stayed outside of quote unquote parapsychology, like Rupert Sheldrake, you talk about him a lot in the book. He's never carried that tag, right? Parapsychology, he has kind of a, okay, if you want to throw me in that group, but that's not really who I am. I'm a Cambridge biologist. Dean Radin, it's different because ions came along at a very early point and funded his work, which is fantastic because, again, he's a world-class scientist, and some of the experiments he's done, the pre-sentiment experiment is pivotal to our whole understanding of kind of nailing that down from a Six Sigma result kind of thing. Similarly with his double slit experiment with the photon beam and the meditator. That is on par with, the original research that those guys did 100 years ago, all that research that was done by Schrodinger and Niels Bohr and all that stuff. That is of that level. It's an extension of that, but it really moves it forward. But so I kind of wanted to recover on the bashing of parapsychology, because the work, we both agree, is absolutely essential. It's fundamental to kind of moving forward. And they've done a lot of that work. I would suggest, as you were kind of alluding to a little bit, they've kind of obsoleted themselves a little bit, because once they show that we really can't measure everything, which is, I think, the main finding from parapsychology, is that materialism is dead, basically. Materialistic science is dead. So from there, where do you go next? And then it starts getting very esoteric, if you will. And I don't know if they have the tools to do that. It's interesting that Dean Radin's latest book is on magic or spirit. So I think he sees the dilemma there and wants to bring the lab to it. But there's another aspect to all this that I really want to touch on, because you don't talk about it in the book, but I think I wonder what you're holding back on this. One of my favorite points in the book, we could probably spend an hour on this one right here, but you have a point where Werner von Braun turns to Fletcher, who it's James Fletcher, I think, who's running NASA. And he says, oh, give him the money, Jim. We all know this stuff is real. Tell us the scene there, fill out the rest of that scene, and then let's talk a little bit about what's going on there.
This was the American project normally referred to as Stargate, where the American military and CIA for about 20 years tried to use psychic spies. And this was part of, say, the Cold War. And they heard that the Russians had started many laboratories to do psychic, say, warfare. And they thought if the Russians have these kind of people on their roster, we have to have them as well. So there were two. The scene you said was a conference where Russell Targ, who also was a colleague of Hal Puthoff, they were trying to get funding for their research at the Stanford Institute, research institute, very closely linked to the Stanford University. And they had been doing already some research with Ingo Swann, a very famous medium, and they wanted to somehow institutionalize their research. And they asked, as you said, Jim Pletcher, who was the leader of NASA, for money, and Werner von Braun was there and turned to them and said exactly what you said. So, and then they got the money. And they
but there's a lot more to this story that we have to fill in, and you told part of it. But who is Werner von Braun, for people who don't know?
Oh, I took for granted that he was Werner von Braun was the rocket guy for Adolf Hitler. He was running the V2 program that sent some beasts of rockets over the English channel to bomb England during the Second World War. And I read a biography about him. He was not very bright at school until he understood that mathematics could help him send up rockets. Then he started already as a schoolboy making his own small rockets, and putting fire to some neighbors' houses and everything. So he was really dedicated to his rocket projects and a fantastic engineer. He was kind of opportunist. He was not really a Nazi, but he was not very opposed to Nazi, as long as the Nazi founded his research.
Maybe on that, I don't know. I've heard other accounts, his biography is certainly going to spin it that way. He was brown shirt before he had to be brown shirt, and he was SS, so, but he was also Project Paperclip, which factors in very importantly to this, right? So at the end of the war, we go in and we grab as many scientists as we can, and Russia does. And so his buddies, his Project Paperclip buddies, were in MK Ultra, and like that's one of the things that I didn't get from the book, but Stargate, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, their boss is Sidney Gottlieb. They're in MK Ultra. They are in MK Ultra, and MK is from the German mind control, and it's picking up the work of what the Nazis were doing in terms of mind control. And this isn't like fantasy, conspiracy stuff. This is just what happened. So it's kind of an interesting connection. And I think there's a lot of threads to the MK Ultra stuff that have to be fleshed out in the Stargate stuff, because sometimes we talk about Stargate and remote viewing, again, in this kind of very parapsychology, nerdy, they were just doing these cool experiments things. It's like, no, as part of a program to really dig into what could be done with the mind. And that whole thing about the Russian competition, no doubt true, but no doubt also a cover story for what we wanted to do. Because it's not like we were just like, oh God, we being the US, we were just like, oh gosh, they're doing it, we have to do it. It was more like, let's get in there and do it.
It is really very complex, but my perception, I'm not say the really deep expert on this, but if you go to, there were done some kind of rather ugly mind control experiments already in the 50s, because this remote viewing program we are talking about, Stargate, is 60s and 70s and even 80s and 90s. But already in the 50s, they were very ugly, and they really killed people. And there were lots of inducing psychosis, with mind-altering drugs and all that. It was really evil, and evil, say, bad stuff. But my impression is, of course, what do we really know about all motives and so? But my perception, say, at least of Hal Purtoff and Russell Targ, is that they are not evil Nazis in disguise themselves. That is my clear perception. I think they are idealist researchers. They are Scientologists, as you probably know. So they have some kind of cultish slant to them. But at least the impression I have is that as I said, not hidden Nazis, and somehow more. And also, if you go to a guy like Ingo Swann, for instance, that helped this program, he was an artist and kind of say what is called bon vivant, hanging out with all the cool people, and he will also a gay man, so he was kind of just celebrating life anyway. So I don't know how much, say, the Nazi tentacles went into this program. Really, I will not say speculate too much about that. But as I said, when I was doing the reading, I felt that the really ugly experiments war happened earlier than these projects Stargate that we are now and that I focus on in my book.
I just think we will never know. But I do think we do have to kind of deconstruct it a little bit and not be so quick to fall into the narrative that they want us to believe that, oh, well, all that was shut down. Well, not really. All the same players are still in place. Sidney Gottlieb is doing his thing. Andre Podrejec. Do you know Podrejec?
Yes, I do.
I mean, Podrejec is. Do you know about the 9?
I will not say I know that, so you have to help me out on that.
So for folks who don't know, the MK Ultra thing is really strange, because if you really are honest about following it and following it beyond where they just want to close it down, it did start in the 50s, and it did have a broad scope in what it's doing. And one of the things is, we're going to jump around here a little bit, but that's okay. There's a researcher in Canada named Grant Cameron, and he's a UFO researcher. And he's the first one who really turned me on to this. But if you ever go research a guy named Wilbert Smith, he was the highest ranking Canadian official in charge of UFOs. So he was right there to the prime minister going, hey, we have all these reports of stuff in the sky. What are we doing? And then he goes down to the US and he finds out, MJ12, he meets with all those guys. He comes back, he writes a memo in the file, which is later released under the Canadian Freedom of Information Act. But the important thing about the memo that Grant Cameron points out is the memo way back in the early 1950s says, okay, they did pick up the thing in Roswell and they have it. And they're also interested in mental phenomenon that may be associated with it. And what Grant connects that to, and I think quite valid, and I think it's a quite valid connection, is that all this MK Ultra stuff, part of the agenda was ET is talking to us telepathically. What the hell's going on in that other dimension? So you have that, you have the Russian thing, because the Russians maybe had those same connections, or maybe have other connections. You know, they have some incredible psychics in Russia and are known to have done that. So I think there's this broader perspective that we have to have. And I think MK Ultra is a part of that. And then I think all these universities start popping up. Like there's MK Ultra programs at Harvard, you know, later on, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. A lot of people don't know this, but you'll find it. You know, he's in a program there unwittingly, completely, like you're saying. The whole LSD thing has links to it. So, and then Pedraevic is such an interesting character because he is channeling these extraterrestrials in the 50s, and they're part of the Nine, and they become the driving force for everything he does. And then Uri Geller, who pops up later and is featured prominently in your book, is right there with Pedraevic saying, the Nine are talking to me, and the extraterrestrials are doing this and doing that. And again, so Uri Geller, so I'm right here. Uri Geller, to tell folks who he is and how he now weave him back into our story of Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ.
Uri Geller is Israeli. He was a paratrooper when he was young, but then he was in the military. He was also doing stage magic to entertain the Israeli troops. But he was wounded, and after say service, he started doing more professional entertaining, and he became quite famous for his trick of spoon bending, mental spoon bending, and he was really great in the 70s, touring all the world, and he also did quite a lot of telepathy, people drawing things in say in their book, and he will somehow try to draw the same while isolated from this person making the drawing. But especially this spoon bending, psychokinetic thing, bending of the metal with power. So that he became research subject also in the Stargate project for Puthoff and Russell Targ, and they did some experiments with him at Stanford Research Institute, which they concluded that he had demonstrated his abilities. Geller did also some experiments with the quite famous physicist, American English physicist called David Bohm. And also Bohm, he did not conclude that Geller had demonstrated his abilities, but he was very intrigued by them, and said in his report that later experiments are scheduled, but these never happened. And also this guy, Werner von Braun, you said, he attested to that Geller at a kind of a social occasion had gotten his ring, you know, the marriage ring, and just stroking it, it had started to curl. That was what Werner Braun said. So either Geller is an excellent illusionist, or he in fact has these powers. So he's quite an interesting guy, and I mailed a bit back and forth with him when I write my book.
Very good. I'd like to hear more about that. He's Mossad, right? Do you think he's Mossad?
To put it that way, I don't think he is Mossad, but I think it would be very strange if Mossad at some point, especially in the 70s and 80s, did not contact him. Of course they did.
Right, because that's what I always heard, that, you know, because you just would. I mean, that's the stuff when people think this stuff is controversial. It's like, if that was your job, you know, if your job was intelligence kind of stuff, it'd be irresponsible for you not to know if this guy could do what he said he could do, because it's like the most important thing. It's like Stargate, you know. I mean, if you can spy on Russian submarines from sitting in a cubicle in Palo Alto, Jesus Christ, I better know if you can do that or if you can't do that. But
exactly.
Pedraevic is the guy that goes and, quote unquote, I can't say discovers him, but he's the guy who goes and meets him in Israel, interviews him, puts him under a deep hypnosis, actually because Pedraich becomes this master in hypnosis that's like few people in the world. I mean, he is a world-class hypnotist that can put people in a trance, puts them in a deep trance. And that's where they start dancing around with this I'm being channeling ET kind of thing. And then he brings him over, and he's the one who introduces him to the folks at SRI, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And the other thing I wanted to elaborate on a little bit is the experiments that these guys do and how they conduct them. And folks can go actually on YouTube and watch a video that they prepared. So these experiments are quite extraordinary. Describe for folks the experiments that they do. These are parapsychology experiments conducted in the early 70s by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. This is before Stargate. This isn't remote viewing per se. This is just testing to see if Uri Geller can do stuff that he claims to be able to do.
They did quite a lot of things, but they did some would say they had objects sealed in small boxes. This I think it was the boxes was originally where you used to keep photographic film, you know, to shield it for light. So they had some kind of drawings inside those boxes, and Uri was to somehow telepathically or clairvoyantly perceive what was drawn on these. And you can, as you said, you go on YouTube, you can see both what they had hidden in these boxes and what Uri drew, and it's quite resembling quite well, yes.
Yeah, and he actually so there's two parts of that, right? So the first part is, you know, the setup of the experiment. Again, we're going to talk about debunking in a minute and James Randi in a minute, because I think it's super important part of this story. But anyone who would suggest that these scientists, and they are world-class scientists, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff are very accomplished, that they couldn't run this experiment is kind of ridiculous. Because what you do is Uri's sitting there, you have an assistant go in the other room, and you have these film canisters, and you open up one of the 10 and you put the paper in it and you bring it back and you go, which canister is it in? Well, I mean, that's not an experiment. It's not a difficult experiment to control. You can get pretty good results there. And then, as you said, part two of that is, okay, first select which canister it in, which he does consistently, way beyond any kind of statistical probability. And then secondly, draw it, you know. And I actually also interviewed Jacques Vallée.
I was going to bring him up. Yes, please continue.
He goes and visits SRI, and he has lunch with Targ and Puthoff and Uri Geller, and he says, "Hey, you know, do what you did." Jacques Vallée does, and he does it right there in front of him. So it's kind of like your Werner von Braun story. Is anyone who doesn't think this stuff is real, you know, there's so much evidence of it. It's really kind of overwhelming.
I will. A friend of mine is a film photographer, Terje Toftnes, and he has made interviews with both Dean Radin, Deepak Chopra, Erwin Laszlo, and all this. He's made an excellent film called The Creative Play of Consciousness. And he was to interview Geller at an occasion. And his little son had brought a teaspoon from the kitchen, from their own kitchen. And Terje told me that that when they had, after he had spoken with Geller, his son gave Geller this teaspoon. Was not prepared, it was from their own kitchen, and he gave it to Geller, and Geller stroked it sometimes and gave it back to him. And then, while he was holding it, the spoon started bending.
That's a fantastic story. I love that. So, you know, we could talk for a long time, and we're going to run out of time if we're not careful. So that's a great segue to James Randi. And I want to talk about James Randi. And in particular, I think James Randi is clearly controlled opposition. And I think anyone who doesn't see it as part of the game in some way, I think is missing the point. But you can jump in and first give the backgrounder about who James Randi is and why we're bringing him up now, because he has a famous encounter with Uri Geller that still sticks in a lot of people's minds.
Yes, James Randi was he passed away last year, and he was a Canadian magician. And he was quite good. He had these kind of daring stunts, hanging upside down in a kind of chain, in a what is called foss, what is called it, like this.
Like Houdini, right? Kind of like
and escape artist, you know, coming out from chains and sealed boxes and that kind of thing. Escape artist, and also stage magician. In fact, he was quite famous for that. But then he started going into this debunking thing, because many magicians, of course, they claim to have paranormal abilities without having them, and Randi, he knew all the tricks, so he started professionally to somehow debunk all the claims of the paranormal. And it's also important to mention the creation of the International Skeptical Organization, the CSI, the study for scientific inquiry, and there was this new organization by Paul Kurtz and Isaac Asimov and other guys, skeptical guys in the 70s, then organized themselves, and Randi became part of that organization. He's the man he loved to hate was Uri Geller. So he challenged Geller on several occasions, and I think what you refer to was a kind of public debunking he did on television, on wasn't the Carson show?
Yes.
Yes, and Carson had cooperated with Randi beforehand somehow to sabotage Geller's tricks, and Geller became quite nervous, and things didn't work out how they were supposed to. The strange thing was that somehow that made people perceive Geller as a true sensitive, because he was very frustrated, and he didn't appear like a steel-controlled magician, you know, doing his well-researched tricks. He appeared as a true sensitive being disturbed. So after that, he was much more in demand than before, and he has had the audacity to call Randi. Geller said, "Randi is my best publicist, because he given him lots of media coverage." So that is, and their story has been fought both inside and outside the courtroom, and Geller has sued Randi for libel. Is it libel? It's called libel.
Yes.
Yes, for several $1 million, you know, and that resulted in Randi being expelled from his skeptical organization, because they didn't want this lawsuit to hurt their economy, and so it has been on and off and on and off and on and off. And but as I said, Randi passed away last year, so now it's just Geller left.
Oh man, Terje,
Yes.
we're gonna have to have a three more levels deep on that one. So one of the things I think is interesting about Randi is that he really creates this cult, the James Randi Educational Foundation or something like that, which has just overtly cultish aspects of it. There were these conferences that people went to. They were hugely popular when I started the show, and there'd be these 40-foot banners with the profile of James Randi on there. And the guy from the beginning is clearly not only fake in a lot of ways, but to me, he's controlled opposition. And here's the evidence for that I think has to be introduced as part of it, because I think it also plays into the Uri Geller thing. And are these guys dancing a dance together in order to portray something? So the thing about Randi is he's kind of a compromised individual. He's kind of a, you know, now with Jeffrey Epstein thing, one thing is now in the public consciousness is that blackmail has been the go-to tool of intelligence organizations for probably forever, but for certainly in our history. So anyone can go look this up about James Randi in New Jersey in the 1980s. He's part of an investigation for illicit phone sex with these teenage boys in New Jersey. And then you can even go read his statement, James Randi's published statement about what happened. And it's kind of a good insight into just how crazy this guy really was, because he really implicates himself in a way that anyone, if you just read it, it's just so, it's a farce in terms of how he claims that these young boys, which he thought were boys, but really turns out to be a girl, were harassing him with these sex calls, and that he went and decided to investigate them, and they broke into his house and found pornography, which, I mean, the whole thing is just bizarre. And it fits into the other things we've heard James Randi say over the years. His biography was that he was this super genius of a IQ that was tested off the charts, and he had a private pass to the library that only, I mean, all this stuff was just kind of, anyone would go it, and this guy would say, if you heard those stories, you would say, this individual is not emotionally stable. But when you put it in the context of a Jeffrey Epstein brownstoning operation, you say this is a compromised individual that can be used for different purposes. And then if you put him in context of what he did with Uri Geller, to me, he looks like controlled opposition. He looks like, I'm going to control both sides of this. I'm going to control the message that Uri Geller is putting out. I'm going to control the message that that is part of Stargate or is not part of Stargate, because we never really wanted that to come out. So I'm going to control both sides of that. And like one of the details of what James Randi does is, like, he claims that those videos that we just talked about that you can still see on YouTube that were performed by SRI and published. Here's another claim from James Randi. He says, look, I talked to the guy who was the videographer, a guy named Pressman. And he told me they were staged. He told me they were fake. And this comes out and this makes things. They go to Pressman. Somebody finally tracks Pressman down, and he says, that's completely false. It's completely ridiculous. I never had contact with James Randi. I never made that statement. And I will say right now, categorically, sign an affidavit that there was nothing fake about the videos. The videos were 100% genuine. So there are layers to this story.
Yes, of course there is. I will not, of course, claim that Randi was as bad as Epstein, but that's a very, what you say, murky matter to go into. But what I quote in my book, I could go because Randi made some claims about fakery in parapsychology lab with serious scientists, and he went out and claimed that he planted, he get two of his assistants working that in that laboratory, and they were faking paranormal abilities. And Randi want to somehow bait the laboratory into declaring these people as being genuine paragnosts, and then he was to expose the whole thing, you know. But the laboratory did not, in fact, declare those people and they become suspicious towards them, and in fact they stopped cooperating with them. And then Randi suddenly went out and claimed that they have said, oh, my assistants are real paragnosts and so. And that was just a media stunt. And the American Department of Defense went into that and made quite a damning report about Randi, and concluded that he was merely interested in promoting himself as a showman, and not really interested in understanding or, say, giving a true picture of what really went on in this laboratory. So because there are so many interests about this, but I think that report is quite good and a good starting point if you want to know whether or not Randy is a serious person in this field. And I don't think he is. And I have never liked Randy, but as I said, the Department of Defense made a quite damning report of him, and I quote that report and give links to it and in my book, and it's also easy to find on the net. So I think people should check out that report because it's held in a very, say, sober and modest tone. It's not full of conspiracy this or anti-conspiracy that, you know. It's very just this, and it's very dissecting report as for the credibility of Randy, in my opinion.
See, but Terje, here's where we all that information is terrific information. It's important information. But how are we going to process that? Randy is controlled opposition. He is being directed in one way or another, not always knowingly, sometimes just off doing his thing, to create a picture. I'll go back to the opening quote that we talked about, Werner von Braun saying, because the second part of what Werner von Braun says is super interesting. I'm going to go back and make sure that I read it. Oh, give him the money, Jim. Here's the clincher. We all know that this stuff is real. We all know that this stuff is real. I would maintain that these guys always knew that all this stuff is real. So anything that comes out that is quasi-government official, like the denial of this stuff, which is still in academia, right? So Dean Radin is out there, or take Rupert Sheldrake, since we haven't talked about it.
Yes.
Rupert Sheldrake's being harassed by Richard Wiseman.
Yes, I know.
Why would we assume that Richard Wiseman isn't controlled opposition? If we just take that Werner von Braun quote, we all know that it's true. So everybody at the highest level knows that this stuff is true. So when we hear this over the top kind of pushback on it, I think we should immediately dig deeper and say, what is the source of that? Is that really a genuine kind of opposition, or is it controlled opposition? I know I'm pulling into some deep waters. What do you think there?
I will just say that I am no expert in these things because, my focus is, I have, of course, read quite a lot about it, but I will not claim any expertise in this because my focus in the book is really the phenomena in itself, the reality of telepathy, the reality of clairvoyance, the reality of precognition. So my focus is the phenomena and how they have manifested in different traditions all over the world, as I said, and also in our own history and the esoteric traditions. So there I have some kind of expertise, but all the political games around it and all the cover operations and all that in modern American history, I will not claim any expertise in that. So I have, of course, and I also talked a lot with the people that have, say, quite a good knowledge, but I will not claim the role as expert in that field. So I'm afraid of disappointing you there, but I think they're intertwined in a way that can't be just easily separated. I don't think we can talk about one without talking about another. And maybe this is an opportunity to jump really into the esoteric, right? Because if the primary finding of parapsychology is, as you alluded to at the beginning, without saying this directly, is that we are more. We are more than our five senses. There is this extended realm in which our ancestors have always talked about, and every learned person throughout history has talked about. So I could pound on that drum, but I won't pound on it anymore. And that drum is, why the hell would we try and advance an idea that we are biological robots in a meaningless universe? Why would we even put up with that in kind of an academic setting when it's just really a rather absurd idea? And that gets us back to what I'm saying. The reason is because it's not real. The real insiders never thought that. Werner von Braun, it's more like what Werner von Braun said. Come on, we all know it's true. We're trying to weaponize it. We're trying to bring it. We're trying to figure out how to do it. And we're going to prop up academics who want to spin that, oh my gosh, but
what is the deeper relationship that you, because you've investigated this, right? I mean, like you said at the beginning, you have an extensive background in, for example, Norse mythology, which is even a prejudicial term to even call it mythology, because one of the things we're jumping on to say, well, that reality, that shamanic reality is probably what we should call it. So where does your investigation of parapsychology, how does that fit into your understanding of this deeper, richer, extended reality that we are apparently a part of?
I have been thinking about this so much, Alex, and I think it's so many questions and so few answers. But as I said, what I missed from parapsychology is the existential aspect of that. And so it's becoming quite personal what you're asking now, but somehow if you read the biography of Carl Gustav Jung, for instance, he felt that he had some guidance from the spiritual level, you know. There was this kind of a guardian spirit called Philemon. He writes about that. And I think also, as I said, also there are so many esoteric, say, traditions that they're much similar in them, but also much, say, differences also. But what I, in my life, to do is try to, say, find my vibe in a way, guidance. What is my task? What is my vocation for my life, really? And I try to follow that, and that is both a rational thing and a kind of irrational or trans-rational thing. And for instance, you mentioned also Jacques Vallée. He also has this big spiritual picture, and we can excellent interview with Vallée in the book of Jeffrey Kripal, Authors of the Impossible. Everybody ought to read that book and that interview with Vallée. So Vallée is an extremely rational man, but also open to the bigger spiritual picture. And there is also much I mailed very shortly with Vallée, and I feel also there's lots of things he won't tell you in a way. But what are those things? And I am also a novice in many things. I know quite a lot about the phenomena themselves because I have had many experiences with them and so, but the bigger picture is really, as I said, it's a metaphysical question. And I don't know if I'm clever enough to understand all those connections, but as I said, in my existential life, I feel that there is some kind of guardian force that you have the ability to somehow connect to, and I try to do to that to the best of my ability. And I see some I also been, as I say, into Jewish mysticism and Christian mysticism, and it seems there are ethical masters in the different traditions, and I try to the best of my little ability to emulate those masters that I admire. But as I said, there's so much in the political and so much evil also into this, and so as I said, I don't know if I'm clever enough, and I don't know also if it's my task to somehow overview this, but that might be your task and with your programs and your study. So
I break that down a little bit differently, because in terms of my personal spiritual journey, I would very much agree with you. I don't think diving into the depths of deception and evil are a part of my spiritual journey. As a matter of fact, I think just the opposite. I think evil gets way too much attention. I think deception gets way too much attention. I think this Luciferian kind of thread that runs throughout this, which is, you know, starts with the alchemist and runs through the singularity, strong AI people, and is certainly all over the place in terms of Stargate and MK Ultra, is a Luciferian kind of operation in that, you know, knowledge, and we can know stuff, and we can do stuff and control stuff. And then even there's there's a satanic, again, in a general sense. I'm not a Christian, so I don't even know what satanic means per se, but we understand satanic is I can marshal the spirits. I can compel the spirits to work on my behalf and get things that I want. So my spiritual path is different.
Make a connection. I used to play chess in old times with the grandmaster of the Ordo Templa Orientis here in Norway. And he is quite famous because, you know, the Norwegian black metal milieu in the music, they were famous for burning churches. And he was some kind of ideological lodestaff for them, you know, Simon Mitka. And he did not respect me because, you know, I tried to be a good guy. And somehow I felt he was despising that because I was not out for power and conjuring spirits and so. But after I beat him 7 times in a row in chess, he started respecting me.
That's a great story. That's a great story. So what is your ranking, your level in chess?
No, it's not so excellent. But in flash games, I play a bit more than 2,000. My spike rating was about 2,070 for flash games, and but I was lucky and beat the Belgian youth master once, and he got 2,400 rating, and Magnus got 2,880 about. You know, so I'm just upper middle class chess player.
I would say very upper middle class. I play every once in a while just against the computer to entertain me or to get past my mind, and that, folks, is at a level that is ultra high. I mean, that is, you know, 1%er kind of thing, right? I mean, that is high. It's 1%er of all the people who are playing. It's.
But my grandfather, he was quite a great chess player. He won 2 competitions. This was between the wars. He won 2 competitions before the world elite in solving chess puzzles, because all the players were communicating, you know, with letters that, and they sent their what he calls solutions for chess problems to a very famous journal in Germany, Deutsche Schachzeitung. And 2 times he won before the world elite in that. So he was a great chess player. As I said, I played when I was a little boy. I never beat him. So I know who I am. I'm, as I said, upper middle class, but not more than that.
So, you know, what is it with Norway? Is it kind of a Rupert Sheldrake morphic resonance there, that there's so many good chess players from a tiny, you know, from a tiny little country, really? What's the total population in Norway?
Yeah, no, it's about 5 million.
I mean, that's just so small. That's good.
Yes, it's not very big. I think the Norwegians say folk spirit is quite serious. If you do something, you do it deeply. So, and that's a kind of yeah, it's not like just boasting of I'm being the world champion on this and that. You are soft spoken, but work very hard and seriously if you go into something. That's kind of, say, what is called dygd, also a kind of Norwegian folk virtue in a way.
So speaking of the Norwegian folk part of it, because you touched on it a little bit, and I thought that was an awesome connection you made with the Norwegian, you know, hard metal, satanic kind of rock kind of thing. And how do you understand the Norse spiritual tradition? What connections have you made with your work in looking more broadly? Like you said, you looked at the Hasidic traditions. You've looked at all these traditions, interviewed 100 people around the world in this cross-cultural shamanism. How do you relate that back to your own tradition, both positively and negatively?
A very interesting question. That if you read the sagas, you can read about Volver and Seidmen. Also, there are people practicing this kind of Seid is kind of magic. Then if you go to the Icelandic, and you know, Norway and Iceland were very close connected culturally at that time, also still, of course, but especially at that time. So people doing kind of, and you can read quite a lot of the paranormal in the sagas, but somehow it's kind of when Christianity came for better or worse, somehow the old tradition were repressed, and it's kind of say a part of Christianity that I'm not very happy with. That somehow you declare everything that is not Christianity to be of Satan. That is what I also told you. The explanatory model is not very, say, good in a way.
Nuanced,
so I think
yeah.
yes, reductionist and limiting way of looking at. So you might of course think that Christianity is somehow higher level than the Old Norse tradition in some ethical aspects, but still the Norwegian tradition is not Satanist at all, basically. And that is also, if you see the newer musicians in this tradition, they have taken a very kind of they have thrown out this say more like always dressed in black satanic thing, you know. And no, it's more like the animistic. You find the spirits of the trees, the spirits, and if you see a crow, perhaps you can communicate with that crow. And so that is more the genuine Norse tradition, this animistic finding the spirit in nature, and that is much more akin to my own perception, you know. And also we talked about Rupert Sheldrake, the respect for intelligence in animals, for instance, that they also have the possibility to communicate telepathically and so. So that is a very, say, nice thing about the Norse tradition, the respect for, and you know, Odin, he had the two ravens, the Hugin and Munin, on each shoulders, you know. And my father, he was a biologist, and he took his doctor's degree on crows, and that he did. He had mentored this famous French biologist and parapsychologist Rémy Chauvin. So that is an interesting connection also. My father saw on crows on how they communicated, you know. They have some internal communication that's quite fantastic, really. So if you do something bad to a crow, that crow will tell it to the other crows, you know. So, and how they exactly do that, that is quite enigmatic, but they succeed in communicating. So the excellent, exciting thing. And I feel, as I said, part of Norse tradition is somehow to be aware of the spirituality of nature.
We don't know the consciousness of animals and how far it extends into this extended realm that we're talking about. You know, one of the jumping off points, I think, for parapsychology, as we talked about from the very beginning, you know, the important part of this book, and I really appreciate you allowing us to go to this kind of level 3 and talk about all these things that aren't directly related to the book, but this is foundational. This book, this short history of everything paranormal, and this deep, deep dive into all these experiments that have been done as part of parapsychology are fundamental. I mean, you can't have this level 3 conversation we're talking about if you don't know the body of research, if you don't know the basic history. And I think you understand from this conversation that Terje is extremely accomplished in not only that, but he's taking in all these different directions. So support this guy who's done all this research by purchasing the book and by supporting his work. And if you can, I'm going to do it right after the show. Write a review of the book on Amazon. Authors really like that, and no one ever does it. And I'm certainly going to do it right as soon as we finish up this interview. So with that being said, I guess I'll skip over the animal part of consciousness, although I think you've kind of touched on that in an important way. Kind of what I wanted to talk about is I want to go back to this Norse tradition, and I want to pull it in a completely different direction and just pick your mind a little bit. One of the more interesting interviews I've done in a while is with a near-death experience researcher named Gregory Shushan. And what he did is this kind of cross-cultural analysis of near-death experiences throughout history. And he found that so many, virtually all the traditions he looked at, their afterlife beliefs were informed by near-death experiences. So, and these are, accounts are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. I wonder, in your investigation, both across cultures, but particularly in the Norse culture, are there any interesting connections to this traveling to this afterlife space that you've run across that you think are interesting or worth talking about?
Interesting approach. We have, of course, reports from those phenomena also in Norway. In fact, the most famous one is when Christianity had appeared from the Middle Ages, from the 13th century. There's a very famous guy who falls asleep and somehow is transported to the other world for about 14 days. And so we also, in some Norwegian folk tales, we have people passing to the other side and coming back. But I don't know if the sagas, I'll have to think about that right here. I know if the sagas tell about these stories of course you have lots of descriptions about what's happened on the other side and so, but
as an aside here, I'll mention one of the really interesting things about his research that I think speaks to it is he found a lot of cultures where they would have the sagas, as you're saying it, or the myths, and then someone in the culture, in the group, would have a near-death experience. They'd get hit on the head or they'd be wounded, and they would travel, and they would come back and they would say, "This is how it happened," and they would change their belief system. So the shaman would then come and say, "You know what, guys? Terje really did it. So, maybe we need to change the thing about the boat sailing into the river with fire, and, maybe it should." And he found that over and over again. I thought that was extremely
very
interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Do you know, this field is so enormous. So, and I cannot go into all, but that's very interesting what you say. That I think that might be also, if you read the old Greek myths, the Orphic traditions, for instance, and your Plato, he refers to a very interesting the history of when he
the
was
battlefield.
placed. Yes, and a fantastic story. So they are everywhere, but I have been very, as I said, there's so many, when you go into these traditions, you see so many similarities, but also quite a lot of differences that somehow reflect the culture where the experience occurs. So it's difficult to say what is part of the core shamanism and what is some more arbitrary cultural, historical dependent factors in that. And might it also be that even the spiritual world develops? Rudolf Steiner would tell you that somehow the angels are, it's not only we get information from the angels, but even the angels learn from us and our experience. So our evolution influences the evolution of the spiritual world. So maybe the spiritual world is not a, say, fixed field, but it's a field developing itself. That could be the case, probably is the case, so, but that's so difficult to know.
That is quite profound, I think. So Terje, with that, where do you see your investigation of the paranormal and particularly parapsychology, where do you see that going in the future with this book and with other projects you might work on?
No, you are, very interesting. I try to say, as I say, I feel some kind of intuitive guidance for what I do. So I try to, right now I'm just out there trying to speak about the book and the themes in it. And so that I will do probably for the next 2 years, I suppose, to get it really out there. And, but I could be interested in writing about spirits and angels and that, because there are quite a lot of report people meeting spirits and angels and that aspect. So this is something that is there, but I have read a lot about, but I have not gone deeply enough into it to write a book about it. So that could be the next 500-page book, I think, spirits and angels.
As you mentioned right there about this book, which is a re-release, There's a lot of work that's gone into it. Obviously, you've collected so much, and it is over 500 pages. It is extremely well written.
Thank you.
It just is. It's very easy to read and absorb, and it's also packed with a lot of information. So again, if this is at all a field that you're interested in, and if you're still here an hour and a half later, you must be interested in it. Check out this book and support this author and his important work. Terje, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for allowing me to go in so many different and hopefully interesting directions.
Thank you, Alex. I could say also there has happened so many strange phenomena when writing this book, you know. And a friend of mine said, you have to write a book about the book, because there have been, you know, precognition, there has been telepathy, there have been so strange phenomena covering the whole process. I have here, 2 meters beside me here, I have 2 audio cassettes from 1989 made by an extremely psychic woman here in Norway. And as far as I can listen what she says, you know, she described what I am experiencing today on those 2 cassettes from 1989. It's crazy. I would not believe this if I not experienced myself. But the point of that is linear time, you know, it's not that real, all that real. There's aspects of us that transcends the linear time.
You know, I can't quite leave that sit, because that would be another direct finding, if you will, scientific finding of this work that you're documenting in the book, right? So one thing that parapsychology kind of nails completely is exactly what you're saying, that we always knew that linear time was an illusion, and now it is, you know. So Dean Radin's pre-sentiment experiment, again, which he replicates more than just about any experiment in history, and gets a 6 sigma result, which, if you know anything about statistics, is over the chart.
I know. That
experiment is pre-sentiment. It's transcending, getting outside of space-time, isn't it? I mean,
yes, and he also did that experiment with the Nobel Prize-winning chemist Kerry Mullis that passed away 2 years ago. And Kerry Mullis has confirmed that he went through this experiment and it worked for him. He was able to say it was just a few seconds, and he say I was able to perceive 3 seconds into the future, and that should not be possible. But he is so he is confirmed. This Nobel-winning trailblazing chemist has confirmed the validity of Radin's research.
And then the final comment we would have to make as an exclamation point on what you just said, because it relates back to a really interesting point you made about your personal spiritual journey, is that we are all engaged in this field, perhaps, that we are both getting from it and giving to it. And yes, I think that speaks to what you've done here with this book in terms of adding to the field, and then the field is coming back and adding to your life, you said quite directly, in terms of experiences. So
thank you, Alex. I like that.
Quite wonderful. Terje, it's awesome talking to you. Thanks again so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Terje for joining me today on Skeptiko. The one question I'd have to tee up from this interview is, what do you think the future of parapsychology is? And the second part of that question is, to what extent does the parapolitical aspect that I keep alluding to, what does that mean for the future of parapsychology? If you think that exists, maybe you think it doesn't. Let me know your thoughts. I'm not getting a lot of response to these questions. Are you interested in these questions? Are these the right questions? Are there other questions to ask? Let me know. More stuff coming up on Skeptiko. Stay with me for all of that. Until next time, take care and bye for now.